God blesses those whose hearts who are poor and realize their need for him, for the kingdom of heaven is theirs. God blesses those who mourn, for they will be comforted. God blesses those who are humble, for they will inherit the whole earth. God blesses those who hunger and thirst for justice, for they will be satisfied. God blesses those who are merciful, for they will be shown mercy. God blesses those whose hearts are pure, for they will see God. God blesses those who work for peace, for they will be called the children of God. God blesses those who are persecuted for doing right, for the kingdom of heaven is theirs. God blesses you when people mock you and persecute you and lie about you and say all sorts of evil things against you because you are my followers. Be happy about it. Be very glad, for a great reward awaits you in heaven. And remember, the ancient prophets were persecuted in the same way. Psalm 19, 7-14, the New Living Translation. The instructions of the Lord are perfect, reviving the soul. The decrees of the Lord are trustworthy, making wise the simple. The commandments of the Lord are right, bringing joy to the heart. The commands of the Lord are clear, giving insight for living. Reverence for the Lord is pure, lasting forever. The laws of the Lord are true. Each one is fair. They are more desirable than gold, even the finest gold. They are sweeter than honey, even honey dripping from the comb. They are a warning to your servant, a great reward for those who obey them. How can I know all the sins lurking in my heart? Cleanse me from these hidden faults. Keep your servant from deliberate sins. Don't let them control me. Then I will be free from guilt and innocent of great sin. May the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be pleasing to you, O Lord, my rock and my redeemer.
So I want you to imagine that you are in a job interview. And you know, in a job interview, you get all of those nice questions that you hate people asking, those kinds of questions. So you're asked that question, what's your greatest strength? And you pause for a moment and you say, meekness. Some of you were laughing. Meekness. Now, I don't know if you've ever answered that question in a job interview that way. If you have, I would love to hear the response of the person on the other side of the interview desk. When you've prepared your resume, have you included meekness as a quality that makes you suitable for that position? Probably not. You listed your professional qualifications, your skills for that particular industry that you're applying for. Because you know your employers, they're interested in education and related work experience. They value strong communication skills and adaptability and teamwork and problem-solving abilities. All of those kinds of things. They want employees with a strong work ethic and a willingness to learn. So if you told an employer that your greatest strength was meekness, they might look at you with a puzzled look on their face, and almost the same as if you said your greatest strengths was you could play bagpipes or something like that. And in some settings may be very pertinent, but for that work setting, they're saying, well, just don't bring those bagpipes to work, okay? So your greatest strength. Meekness is kind of out of sync, out of place with the values of the world. And even within the church where it's in the Beatitudes and we know it's a value, it's a quality that we should have, I think often even in church circles, it's treated something like your least favorite vegetable. You know what that one is. It might be a different one for all of us. You know it's good for you, but you eat it kind of reluctantly. Is that true? Yet Jesus included meekness in the Beatitudes as a quality that belongs to those who enjoy the good life. So today we're going to continue in Jesus' surprising description of the good life with the Beatitudes. Now, as I was working on this, I arranged them in three triads: a life of less, a life of longing, and a life of love. And I thought I was going to get through 3 on the life of less, and I only got through 2. So we're continuing with the last one in there, the meek, or we could say the unimportant, and then moving into a life of longing. Summarizing last week's, I think that the paraphrase or commentary, poetic commentary, whatever you want to call it, from Eugene Peterson, actually he gets it quite well. When he says this for those first Beatitudes in 3 and 4, when there's less of you, there is more of God and his rule. You're blessed when you feel you've lost what's most dear to you. Only then can you be embraced by the one most dear to you. A good life is a life of less of the things that do not satisfy and will not last. Blessed are the poor. Blessed are those who mourn. This week we're looking at the third one, less power. And then we're going to switch from less to more as we get into the second triad. What do you crave more of? So from less to more. So that's how we're bridging that today. Let's start with a few definitions. And there are several definitions. When you look at this in commentaries, there's all sorts of words that are used to try and get the force of this. Meek, gentle, powerless, broken, humble, poor, needy, helpless, unimportant, weak, oppressed, even afflicted. And it's translated that way because it's kind of hard for us to really grasp that. Maybe not intellectually, but emotionally. What exactly is that word? It talks about someone who has or exerts less power. Now, when you look at the word in context in other Greek literature, they tell you that it's often used about a wild animal that has been tamed. It has power, but that power has been managed. That power is somehow broken. And then when you get into the looking at sort of the words that have been translated that way from the Old Testament, where the word that would be meek is used in the Old Testament, it's also used in a way that is recognize that powerlessness. Afflicted, it's sometimes translated. In Job, where Job's talking about about rich people that sort of do what they want, and talks about that they take the donkey of a poor person and calls that poor person that really can't do anything about it as an afflicted one. In Psalm 74:21, do not let the oppressed retreat in disgrace. May the poor, or the meek, same word, and needy praise your name. So when you look at that context, it's not a very appealing word, is it? Not a very positive word. And in Jesus' time, it was not a positive word. People did not want to be considered meek. And even in religious circles today, a meekness is sometimes equated with weakness. It's seen as a deficiency rather than a strength. So when Jesus was speaking this and saying, blessed are the meek, the response of people there was say, I don't want to be meek. Most were, because they were poor and they tried to prop up their image. They appeared to be more prosperous or powerful than they really were. They boasted about their possessions or their wisdom or their connections. That was part of the culture. You propped yourself up, puffed yourself up as best you can so you'd look a little bit more impressive than you actually were. People tried to be impressive and confident and powerful, but most were still pretty meek. They were common, ordinary people with little or no power. Powerless because of the hand that life had dealt them. But in Jesus, there is a shift. In Matthew 11, verse 29, Jesus says, take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you'll find rest for your souls. And if you go back to the old King James Version, there's actually more than one King James Version. I don't know, when people get hung up on they have to read the King James Version, say, which version of the King James Version? There's the Authorized Version, then there's another version, then there's way back the 1611 version, and there's a new King James. So anyway, but the Authorized Version, it says, take my yoke upon you and learn of me, for I am meek and lowly of heart. I'm really curious. I would love to be in those translation committee meetings and say, why are you using the word gentle? Most translations now, or many, use the word gentle when Jesus says, I am gentle and humble of heart. It's the same word as in the Beatitudes. Blessed are the meek. So why don't they just translate it meek there? I don't know. It's beyond my pay grade. I never went that far in my studies and in Greek and all of that kind of thing. But it is the same word. And yes, gentle is one of the connotations of it. So what's Jesus saying? I think maybe in those translations, we're more comfortable with saying Jesus is gentle than Jesus is meek. Because maybe it's because we're so marked by our culture that meek still has that connotation, that pull of being weak. There is a sense in which the biblical word is powerless. Because Jesus came and he chose to lay aside his power, to become powerless. That's the central biblical truth. He calls himself powerless. And those who want a good life have to embrace that mantle of powerlessness, a life of less, a life where we lay down our power. Many times we're powerless because of our circumstances. Poor and mourning have very little power. Others see them as powerless because they're unfortunate, they're afflicted. They can't exert power because they don't have any of it. But Jesus was meek by choice. Philippians 2 tells us that he is the one who is in very nature God. Hebrews 1 describes him as the radiance of God's glory, the exact representation of his being. Colossians 1 describes him as the image of the invisible God, the firstborn over all creation. Yet he chose to be humble, meek, and powerless. The one who told his disciples, "All authority is given to me," became an embryo, subject to the 9-month gestation period. He was born an infant, completely dependent on those around him for food and shelter and nurture and instruction. Not only that, he grew up in a home that had a stigma, a story, something hanging over their head. When you read in John 8, the religious leaders were arguing with him, and they reminded him of this stigma. It says, they're talking with them and says, in the old King James, "We were not born of fornication," or "We were not born out of sexual immorality." Other translations translate it, "We are not illegitimate children." They use sort of, maybe more polite terms to say that people knew that Joseph was not Jesus' biological father. And that made their family on the outside, social outcasts. So he lived with that stigma of an outsider, illegitimacy. But he wasn't bothered to be an outcast or to be associated with outcasts. He didn't care that others may have considered him unworthy or unimportant. Remember, Jesus is God, the second person of the Trinity with limitless power. Yet he chose to limit that power and to become a limited human, experiencing the whole gamut of human experience and limitations. Could only be in one place at one time. Experienced hunger and weariness and cold and grief and poverty. Remember, Jesus said the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head? He limited himself to the physically painful and emotionally excruciating experience of suffering, and he suffered death. And so when we look at that term meek, there's been a shift in that word meek. It is powerless, but it is in a different sense. Tim Keller, he defines meekness as power under restraint or power with restraint. I listen to the theologians D.J. Gupta and A.J. Swoboda. They have a podcast, excellent podcast. They bring it about once a month called Slow Theology. They take sort of a very deep and refreshing dive on a topic. And in that podcast, they quote a commentary where the author calls meek the little ones. They quote, "The little people are literally those who make no claims for themselves before God or before other people." They go on and say, well, meekness is not weakness. It's power that withholds its full capacity, limits the range of the action that it does. There was a church leader back in the 600s, Flammacus, and he called meekness a permanent condition of the soul, which remains unaffected by whether or not it's spoken well of, or whether it's honored or praised. All of us have some measure of ability, strength, power. It's part of our circumstances. That may be our physical attributes. Maybe we're bigger or taller or stronger than others. It may be our gifts that we have of creativity or intellect. For whatever reason, we might be above average. Even economically, as people who live in Canada, we're above average for what the world has, and we have more power, that is more privilege, more options, more opportunity than most people within the world. And you know, there is a parallel. There's a term called quiet wealth. You ever heard that term? It refers to people who are actually quite well-to-do, but they live in pretty ordinary, modest kind of circumstances. They don't let that wealth show. They just live more ordinarily. I think a good definition of meekness might be quiet power, a realistic view of their power. Yes, some have circumstances, abilities, creativity, intellect, position, or wealth that gives them privilege, that gives them advantage, but they don't use that advantage for themselves. They don't use that advantage to push to the front of the line. They know that their unique skills and gifts and abilities gives them a privilege that others do not have, but they refuse to leverage that privilege for their own benefit. Instead, they use it to benefit others. They use their strengths, gifts, position, less for themselves and more for the benefit of others. Meekness is restrained power. People who are meek, they approach others with curiosity and generosity and grace rather than expectations and demands. They're motivated more by how they can help the other rather than how they can get something from them. They're comfortable, completely comfortable in their own gifts, abilities, and skills, but even more comfortable and confident in what God has given them and what God will provide them. They don't need status, they don't need the biggest place, or they don't need the biggest piece. They've overcome that childish urge that stays within us that wants the biggest piece of cake. They know they have all they need, and they humbly invest that in others. Interesting, when we see the meek shall inherit the earth, that actually comes right from the Psalms. Jesus lifted it from the Psalms, included it in Beatitudes. Psalm 37. Read Psalm 37. It talks about that struggle of the poor in a land where so many are rich. Verse 11, the meek will inherit the land and enjoy peace and prosperity. Verse 18 of Psalm 37, the blameless spend their days under the Lord's care, and their inheritance will endure forever. Verse 27, turn from evil and do good, then you will dwell in the land forever. Verse 34, hope in the Lord and keep his way. He will exalt you to inherit the land. When the wicked is destroyed, you'll see it. Meekness. I love the way that Peterson puts it in the Message. You're blessed when you're content with just who you are. No more, no less. That's the moment you'll find yourself proud owners of everything that can't be bought. Is that good? Just who you are. No more, no less. And suddenly you're in that place where you don't have to prove it. You don't have to push yourself forwards. You don't have to tell people about yourself. But God pours into your life all sorts of good things. My clicker has decided to stop clicking. Let's see here. Oh, now we're all over the place. Oh, okay. Okay, we'll back up there and we'll see if we can get through. There we go. Okay, that's the next slide I want. You didn't get that nice quote. You probably wanted that quote from Peterson, did you? Look it up in the Message version. You can do it on Bible Gateway. And you're blessed when you're content with just who you are, no more, no less. That's the moment you find yourself proud owners of everything that can't be bought. Now we're shifting gears from a life of less to a life of more. Longing for more, craving for more. What do you crave? God blesses those who hunger and thirst for justice, for they'll be satisfied. The Bible was written in a time when hunger and thirst were pretty common. We're at the doorstep of the majority of the population. Famine was a constant threat. Access to water was a daily challenge that took good portions of their time. Many people face bouts with physical hunger and thirst. Now, hunger is a powerful motivator. Hunger and thirst are very intense words. Back in the Proverbs, it says, the appetite of laborers work for them. Their hunger drives them on. They can be pretty good motivators. Now, we live in a world where, in our part of the world, most of us enjoy enough food. Sometimes I enjoy too much food. And in our culture, there's actually more problems with too much food than too little food. But we still have other cravings. When our appetite for food is satisfied, we have cravings for other things, like belonging or significance or excitement. And often our cravings are misdirected. Hunger and thirst are very powerful ideas. In fact, we recognize that power. There's a word that's, I don't know exactly when this word came up. It's probably a decade or two ago, the word hangry. And you are familiar with hangry? If you're not, ask your spouse. They'll tell you that they know when you're hangry, right? Because it's that, you've got that craving, that hunger, and you're getting irritated and annoyed and kind of, and eventually, you have some food and everything is better. You see, even beyond food, we have this appetite, this craving for more. And in our world, it becomes like for more comfort, for more convenience, more pleasure, more luxury, more power, more recognition. It's a more that's inward focused. And that appetite of personal desires is actually toxic. It steers us off into the course of comparison and competition with others. Those words, hunger and thirst, are very intense. They reflect a craving, sometimes even an annoyance or an irritation when things aren't the way they should be. When we feel hungry, it affects us. It affects our emotions. That's why that word hangry resonates so well. So in our Western world, we satisfy the physical hungry and thirst quite easily. But there's a deeper hangriness that comes out in other ways. This is theory of mine. I don't know how solid it is, but my theory is this. We have a society that has grown hangry. Not for food, for something else. It knows that things aren't right, and there is a longing for things to be right, and it's not how it should be. So it comes out in annoyance and irritation and complaining and depression and anxiety and addictions and distrust and road rage and polarized politics and all other sorts of things. Is that hangriness? I just wonder. See, there's a chronic consciousness that things are somehow wrong. And that's what Jesus recognizes. Now, in us, we have this tendency, and for us, we have this tendency that things are right when things just work to my advantage the best. But Jesus expands the scope and says, blessed are those who hunger and thirst after justice, righteousness, things better in the entire world. He echoes what we find in the Old Testament prophets in Amos. Let justice roll on like a river, righteousness like a never-failing stream. And when you talk about righteousness, there's actually two flavors of righteousness that Jesus is talking about. We see those in Scripture. Two flavors. Personal and global. Personal righteousness, that's a person who is in a right relationship with God and others. The second is a social righteousness, a society that operates in cooperation and harmony, so everyone can thrive. Where everyone's in a right way of living mutually together in society. There's equity for groups that before had been marginalized. Sure, not everyone has the same amount, but no one's being oppressed. Everyone has all they need for life. Maybe a better word is mutuality, not equality. No one's better or worse than anyone else. Everyone is worth loving. Everyone is worth blessing. A place where people are never taken advantage of. A world where people operate on the premise, how can we make this work for both of us? Not how can I win so that you lose? How can we make it work for all of us? Personally, we have that intense desire in our lives to be right with God and right with others. It's a hunger for righteousness. But globally, we have an intense desire for the entire world around us to be made right. We crave that world of equity or mutuality where everyone has their basic needs met and everyone has the opportunity to flourish. All people can thrive regardless of where they were born, color of their skin, the language they speak, their physical appearance, place where all are valued. All can flourish within their God-given uniqueness. So Jesus tells us that we need to hunger and thirst. Not just crave for our own benefit, but hunger and thirst for a world that is made right. And in fact, when Jesus came, he said, that's what I came to do, to set things straight. And he pulled from the Old Testament prophets in Isaiah 61 and said, this is quoted in Luke 4 when he was in the synagogue in Nazareth. And he opened the scroll to Isaiah and he read, the Spirit of the Lord is on me because he has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He sent me to proclaim freedom for the prisoners and recovery of sight for the blind, to set the oppressed free, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor. Craving, longing. You know, we're very good at satisfying our physical cravings. When you really have true hunger and thirst, your entire focus of life is going to be on finding food and water. But we're good at feeding our other cravings too, aren't we? Think of the last time you wanted that special something. Might be a new car or new furniture or something new for your house or a new outfit. Or for us guys, maybe some new tools because you just need that one tool for that project. And or in the music world, it's just, you know, a new piece of gear or a new instrument or another thing like that because they are so nice, right? And when we have that craving, we're also very good at rationalizing things and arranging things so that we can make it happen. We rationalize our desires and find a way to get what we want. Now, sometimes, yes, we have we have competing cravings. I want to be physically fit, but I enjoy ice cream. And those things are kind of pushed against each other. I want to save for retirement, but I want that immediate impulse purchase that has that gratification now. We feed our cravings, so don't we? The point of what Jesus is saying is this. If we really crave more of God and more of God's kingdom, we'll be filled. We will find it. Now that threads in the Old Testament as well as the New. In Jeremiah 29:13, you will seek me and find me when you search for me with all your heart. And then when Jesus gave us the Lord's Prayer, he said, Luke 11, so I say to you, ask and it will be given to you. Seek and you will find. Knock and the door will be open to you. Craving for righteousness. It's a longing for God to make things right, not just for us, but for our entire world. A world that doesn't need locks on doors. It doesn't need countries to have militaries to protect themselves. It's where people just do what is right and good because everything is right within the world, without having to have endless rules to keep people in line because they do what's going to be for the benefit of everyone, not just themselves. So what do you crave the most intensely? For things to be comfortable for you? Or things to be right for? God blesses those who hunger and thirst for justice, for they will be satisfied. So I just want to review a little bit. How does this resonate with us? The two ideas, meekness, hunger for righteousness. It's probably true that we don't naturally warm up to the idea of meekness as virtue. Yet there's something within us that actually resonates with what Jesus is saying. I know that because there's something within us that reacts against people who are the opposite of meek. What words are coming to mind? What is the opposite of meek? Arrogant, boastful, self-important, pushy, demanding, easily offended, power-hungry, authoritarian, domineering. We kind of don't like people that operate in that way, do we? We'd rather that they be different. Maybe meekness is being the different that we wish others would be towards us. Jesus talks about that later, a golden rule kind of thing that's coming up in the Beatitudes. Now, we don't see ourselves as being those negative things because we're good at spinning it. We're industrious. We're confident. We're a self-starter. We're a person who gets things done. We're persuasive, not pushy. We call people to high standards. We're not demanding. Or maybe we're just not meek. You know, when you hold power, you don't know how heavy your words or emotions are to people who have less power. We all need to take that to heart. When you hold power because of whatever advantages or privilege or skills you have, you don't realize the weight that your words or emotions have on those who have less power. The God of the universe, all-powerful, came in meekness. And in a way that Jesus shone new light on this, but it's not a new truth because the most quoted verse in the Old Testament, most quoted idea in the Old Testament comes from is Exodus 34, when Moses meets God face to face and God reveals his character. Who is God? The Lord, the compassionate and gracious God, slow to anger, abounding in love and faithfulness, maintaining his love to thousands, and forgiving wickedness and rebellion and sin. And it does go on to say that he does punish to the third and fourth generation, but when you see that quoted again in Deuteronomy, it says that, but he shows his love to 1,000 generations. Those of you that are doing the math, yes, 250 times his compassion is at least 250 times greater than his wrath. Meekness. So in a way, we may not resonate with the word, but we actually resonate with it when we flip it around and say, how do we feel with those that aren't meek? And we resonate with it when we get to know Jesus, the King of the universe, who limited his power for us. And the second part, we really crave a world that would be better, a world that would work. We see all the things that are wrong every day in the headlines, and we know that just more money won't fix things. The message of the gospel that Jesus is restoring things, and he will one day bring that to completion. And even in our own lives, we know that things aren't right, and we know that we need help. There's a hunger in us. We know our own sin, our own failures. We know how hard it is to break bad habits and hard to build new ones. We feel the pull of that old nature. But there is help. There's healing and forgiveness and restoration, and there's the power of the indwelling Spirit, whom Jesus sends to those who trust in him and submit to him and say, yes, I'm going to live and I'm going to follow you. I'm going to follow your example. I'm going to be meek. I'm going to hunger